Welcome to Week 8, Tax Structures and Education. This week is part of an extension of the fiscal capacity and effort argument. So I want you to consider this question. It reads, is it fair for me to pay taxes for an education system when I pay tuition to send my children to private school? You have to consider, is this an issue of human capital, an issue of punishing a person for having wealth? Will it force people to find loopholes in taxation laws and write-offs? Or is it part of the sacrifice of being a citizen of this country? So, next we'll proceed on to our understanding of taxation laws, or taxation philosophy, I'm sure. Taxation philosophy can be contrived into two people. Of course, there's Adam Smith, which we'll always refer to about, but there's also another person by the name of Joseph Stiglitz. Both have equal understandings of taxation philosophy. But I want you to consider, how does Joseph Stiglitz's assessment of taxation add to Adam Smith's four maxims of taxation, considering the time gap in which they both lived? So, next we'll move into types of tax structures. There are essentially three types of basic tax structures. One is progressive tax, two is regressive, three is proportional. Progressive taxes are generally what we consider our income taxes. So we know that basis, but regressive and proportional are kind of interesting. So I want you to first consider regressive taxes, and I start that with a question. Your book talks about the terrible 10. Why are the terrible 10 so terrible? Think about that as you read about those particular states. The next question I want you to consider is, how can proportional taxes also be seen as regressive? To think about that, I want you to consider two people. First person earns $250,000 a year as an income. The second person, and we'll take a little time to render him. The second person only earns $60,000. But if they were taxed at the same proportional rate, whose impact would hurt worse? So I want you to consider that as you think about that particular thing. Next, we'll talk about taxation theory. Particularly, we'll talk about sacrifice theory versus benefit theory. Your textbook talks about that. So when you go through that section, I want you to think about the following two questions. Or think about basically the following two questions when it comes to that. The question is, consider what will be the impact of a benefit theory of taxation of schools, where under benefit theory, I should only pay if I am directly impacted by the schools, if I have a child in the system. Or consider what would be the impact of the sacrifice theory of taxation of public schools, where we all consider and pay as a sacrifice to citizenry into the education system. Next, let's consider rem versus personam taxes. Rem taxes are a tax on things, where personam taxes are a tax on people. So your book talks about that a couple times. I want you to think about the main things tax, which is property tax. So in that property tax, I want you to consider two questions. What would be a local tax alternative for school districts in big cities where few people owned homes and cars, like in New York City, things like that? So very few people own homes and cars, so there's not much personal property tax to tax. Second, what are some of the challenges to the use of personal property tax as the sole funding of public schools? And could there be other alternatives or combinations, as we talked about, a tax-based surrogate for those things? Also consider other things such as sales and consumption taxes, and could they be used? So to think about that, consider three states: State A, State B, and State C. Now, you also consider the school district right there is that star. So in State A, they have a sales and consumption rate or tax rate of 9.4, in B 6.8, and in C 2.1. Yet in each state they have the equal amount of stores. They have the same grocery stores, same department stores. So, given that the difference in the taxes, sales and consumption tax rates, I ask you this question: how might consumption and sales tax hurt state A's school district? Think about that as you read about sales and consumption taxes. The next section, we'll talk about new taxes. There are three new taxes being considered: wealth, value added, and expenditure. A friend of mine who happens to be in the NFL spoke to me about paying an entertainment tax every time they go to play in a host city. So consider this. Which of these new taxes, in your opinion, is better at aiding fiscal capacity? Wealth, value added, or expenditure? And your book talks about each one. The last section we'll talk about are tax exemptions. There are essentially 5 entities that receive tax exemptions at times: sales tax, and most of the time sales taxes are for necessities; industry tax, which a few cities have used to bring in corporations to help boost the economy; favored groups, nonprofits, and church and charity. I want you to consider this question: would levying personal property tax on churches be considered a violation of church and state? And that's something to think about, because the power to tax is the power to destroy, according to the Supreme Court case McCulloch versus Maryland. And what if the church owns a school and the state funds secular aspects of the school, such as transportation? Now, is it fair for them to receive funds from the state, yet do not have to pay taxes? Those are things to consider. Once again, I enjoy looking forward to your weekly reflections. Hope you enjoy this week's readings.